Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengausen. Today is October 28th, and this episode is going to be packed. There's a lot of news to cover. The Russian economy is plunging into an abyss, but everyone pretends not to notice. Putin boasted that he would capture Donbass by October 15th. So how did that turn out? Putin's special envoy Dmitriev's visit to the US turned into a major embarrassment for Russia. Why does not a single Arab country want to accept refugees from Palestine? Meanwhile, Orbán is officially building an anti-Ukrainian alliance. I'll tell you who will join it in this episode. Sakhalin was plunged into darkness, a blackout, an explosion, and thousands of subscribers left without power. And how is Russia offering NATO security guarantees from itself? All this and more in today's episode. There will be a lot of interesting things, so if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe. That way you definitely won't miss the next episodes. In private conversations, Putin boasted to his allies that Russia would occupy the entire Donbass by October 15th. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Well, if you add to this the fact that Putin planned to do it even earlier, back during the summer offensive, then this is already the second or third deadline that's been pushed back. Remember those same 50 days that Donald Trump gave Putin, and they ended 50 days. That 50-day ultimatum ended on September 8th. So, apparently, Putin had convinced Donald Trump even earlier that there would be a summer offensive, that he would take the Donbass now, just give him 50 days. Well, neither 50, nor 60, nor 70 days helped. Now let's look at how this appears from Donald Trump's perspective. So, Putin is telling everyone that he will capture the Donbass. I don't know what arguments he used with Trump. He somehow managed to get those 50 days from him, but he did. But in the end, 50 days passed. Nothing. 60, 70? Apparently, he won't capture it by the end of the year either. Donbass. And now, after Putin failed to do what Trump assured him of, the US president's rhetoric changes. He no longer minces words. He already calls Putin a paper tiger and decides on rather serious sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, two Russian oil giants. And I would also remind you that Trump started to claim that Russia, in fact, isn't really capturing anything significant. And in general, we still need to see what exactly it's capturing, because at the same time, Ukraine is liberating its own territories. So, in reality, Trump realized that Putin was bluffing and saw proof of it in practice. He wrote him off as a loser, and the conversation with losers is different. And losers can be kicked, even with your feet, even in the stomach. And now Putin is boasting that by October 15th he will also secure a second term. October 15th, not even close. What to do? After that, on the 16th, it happened. A phone conversation between Putin and Trump. And during that phone conversation, Putin demanded that Ukraine hand over Donbass to him on its own, making it a condition for ending hostilities. In other words, since he couldn't capture it, now he wants them to just give it up. In return, Putin promised an act of unprecedented generosity, simply to let go, not to occupy part of the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, which he can't occupy anyway. It's already been 4 years. I think that such an experienced player as Donald Trump, a card player, a casino man, was probably just stunned by Putin's audacity. Give me that. In exchange for what I can't seize, I'll give you something else I also can't seize. You see, this brazen, cowardly, greedy, balding moth decided to devour an entire fur coat in the closet and not choke on it. I'm really curious how that conversation sounded, Donald. I said I would capture Donbass by September 8th. There were some minor difficulties. Medvedev got lost in the forest. The whole Kremlin went looking for him. We got a bit turned around, so in the end we couldn't capture it. We were busy. But by October 15th, come hell or high water, I'll capture it. October 15th, 16th. On the phone, Trump calls and says, I was supposed to capture it yesterday, but I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I have a fever. Just give me another month, please, and don't impose sanctions. How does that work? So Donald Trump is watching all of this. And let me remind you, on October 17th, there was a meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy. Well, and then the decision to impose sanctions was made. Now let's talk a bit about how sanctions are supposedly not scary at all. For Russia, a third of the Russian Federation's oil exports are under threat. Greek tankers are refusing to transport Russian grades of oil because of the sanctions. There you have it. The participation of Greek ship owners who used to export up to 20 million barrels of Russian oil every month, about a third of the oil exported from Western ports, had dropped to a minimum by the end of October after the sanctions were tightened. And on top of that, let's add another 117 tankers from the shadow fleet included in the new European sanctions package. And the price, this is what's most interesting. After these sanctions were imposed against Russian oil giants, freight rates shot up sharply. That is, the cost of delivering a single shipment of oil to India was initially $7 million. That was at the beginning of the month, but now it's already risen to 10 million per voyage, and it's still going up. And naturally, besides the fact that Russian oil and fuel have now become highly toxic after the sanctions, and now Putin will be forced to offer even bigger discounts, and soon enough everyone is already rushing there, practically chasing after him for those deals. And add to that the loss of 40% of the processing capacity of Russian oil refineries, after what I call direct sanctions from Ukrainian drones. By the way, Peskov is snapping back at Donald Trump. In other words, Putin is personally afraid, so he sends either the drunkard Medvedev or that mustachioed floozy Peskov. Recently, Trump was asked a question and said something like, Putin is doing fine right now. And Trump replied, well, let's see in 6 months. So Peskov came out and said, yeah, you'll see. Meaning he said, let him watch in 6 months. Are you guys out of your minds over there or what? I don't get it. And then there's Peskov. Now they're all tripping over each other to talk about this Burevestnik, saying that now we have this super scary missile, one that nobody has ever seen. In reality, out of 13 tests, not a single one was successful. So the Russians have this practice where they ask questions to Putin or Peskov or someone else. Well, they ask the right questions. And Peskov answers them, thus pushing the necessary agenda. So to the question, can we consider the Burevestnik tests? In response to the increasing sanctions from the US and Europe, Peskov said, despite our openness to establishing dialogue with the United States, Russia, and above all the President of Russia, are guided by our own national interests. That's how it was, that's how it is, and that's how it will continue to be. And he added that the Europeans really are in a state of internal, hysterical, Russophobic, aggressive, and belligerent state. In my opinion, it's actually the Kremlin elders who have started to panic. Putin recently showed up again, once more claiming that sanctions mean nothing to them, but he was visibly twitching. His Botox seemed to be migrating, his eyes moving under the skin like this, his shoulders jerking like a puppet on strings. All in all, it was sad to watch. Yes, friends, and let me remind you, it was thanks to our heroes and defenders of Ukraine that Putin's offensive failed. Let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser for a vehicle equipped with electronic warfare for our UAV operators platoon and the 117th Brigade. They are currently carrying out missions in the Donetsk region. A friend of mine who serves there wrote to me and said that just a few days ago they lost the last vehicle they had. A drone flew right into the electronic warfare system, thank God. It was the dome-shaped one on the roof. Thank God everyone survived, but now they have no transport. So without rotation, without supply runs, even with good electronic warfare, it's a very dangerous situation. So let's help our soldiers. Right now they are near Lyman and Serebryanka carrying out combat missions. These are truly outstanding UAV operators. It's much harder for them without a vehicle. So let's all pitch in a little. Let's make this happen. I know that together we are a tremendous force. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There is Mono, there is Private and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I see all of you and I want to express my immense gratitude both from myself and from our defenders. You are simply incredible. Let's help our people, or you can also use the QR code here to go to the fundraiser. And Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave an interview. There are a few important points and I'll be very brief, just a few sentences. So we are only entering into diplomacy from the position where we currently stand. That is, no one is going to leave any regions voluntarily at the request, demand or threat of Putin. He also mentioned that our long-range missiles Flamingo and Ruta have already seen combat use. And near Pokrovsk, we are building up our forces for defense, and Pokrovsk itself as well. This is currently the main objective of the Russians. In addition, there are now 3 parallel negotiation tracks regarding aircraft, that is, with the Swedes, the French, and the Americans. In other words, our overall request is for an air fleet of 250 new aircraft. That is extremely powerful. Recently, I came across a video and I could hardly believe my ears when I heard it. The spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Zakharova, came out and, as I heard, she said the following, verbatim, and I quote, "The country is mired in debt. There is an unprecedented reduction in social spending on the agenda, but instead of focusing on real problems, the authorities are preoccupied with finding more funds for their militaristic adventures, for the arms race." I think, now that's Dimash, that's a spokesperson. But you know, she was actually talking about France, a country in debt, militaristic, yes. And more international news. Over there in the Gaza Strip, things are still unsettled. Nothing has calmed down yet. Trump has firmly demanded the release of the bodies of the hostages that Hamas is refusing to hand over. Well, I understand why they're not handing them over, because if they do, it might become clear that these hostages might have been tortured, and then it would become public knowledge. That's why they're not releasing them. And against this backdrop, there's news that not a single Arab country wants to accept Palestinian refugees from Gaza. And Donald Trump has spoken about plans to resettle all these refugees in other countries, but so far no one has agreed to this. It's still just an idea at this point. By the way, why don't Russians, who are constantly shouting freedom for Palestine in my comments, saying Israel is this and that, want to take in refugees themselves? It's a big country, and they always talk about how great they are. You're actually short on workers over there. Thanks to Putin, as you should say, over 1 million Russians have been lost in this war. And recently, one of the relevant Russian ministers said that they would have to bring in between 2 and 5 million migrants into Russia. So go ahead and do a good deed. And in Arab countries, by the way, it's the same story. Israel was constantly being accused. But why is it that not a single Arab country wants to take in Palestinian refugees? Or is it something else? Well, maybe they just remember history very well. Especially Jordan and Lebanon. And they haven't forgotten how the poor Palestinian refugees, they almost overthrew the king in Jordan. There were unsuccessful assassination attempts against him. Let me remind you, after the 1948 war, a huge number of refugees from Palestine ended up in Jordan, by various estimates up to 700,000. In just about over a little more than 20 years, they settled there and made themselves at home. In just a little over 20 years, the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, entered into armed clashes with the Jordanian army, the country that had taken them in, that had given them refuge. These events would later become known as Black September, along with a failed assassination attempt on the king, hijackings of airplanes, passengers taken hostage, planes blown up, war with governments. They gave them refuge by force, as it's called. In short, the relocation of a significant number of Palestinians to Jordan became the source of civil war and revolution. And let's not forget the terrorist attack at the Munich Olympics. That was all Black September. The group was already active back then. Mossad later hunted them all over the world. They tracked down everyone involved in Black September. And by September 24th, 1970, the regular army had already gained the upper hand over these militants. And the militants of the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Arafat, about 150,000 Palestinian refugees flee to Lebanon. They were later expelled from Jordan. We don't need that here. But that's not all. They moved to Lebanon, but there too. After the 1948 war, there were about 100,000 Palestinian Arabs who were placed in camps that had been established by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. And this second wave, after the failed coup, flees to Lebanon and joins the first group that had been living there since 1948. And by 1987, about 400,000 Palestinians were living in Lebanon. What are they doing? They begin to organize training camps in southern Lebanon, training camps for militants. And naturally, this leads to a deterioration of the situation of Israeli-Lebanese relations, because Palestinian refugees from southern Lebanon begin to constantly attack and shell Israel, carrying out various raids. As a result, the Palestine Liberation Organization effectively controls southern Lebanon and drives out the local Lebanese population from their land. And there is direct military confrontation from Lebanese territory. That's all there is to it. Naturally, the Christian community of Lebanon would not tolerate this, and clashes began between the Christian community of Lebanon and these Palestinian refugees. And in 1982, at that time I was just 1 year old, Israel's patience ran out. They had had enough of being constantly attacked from Lebanese territory. So the Israeli armed forces attacked Lebanon and pushed back the insurgents from southern Lebanon. And inside, just so you understand, the Palestinian militants started moving deeper into the country, but nobody was waiting for them there. There wasn't just a Christian community there, but also a Muslim one. They started beating them and saying, "Why the hell do we need you here? You drove us out from the south, now get out of here." You see what I mean? And why is it that nobody wants to accept Palestinian refugees? Well, maybe because they know the history. By the way, Arab countries, would you like to take them in? 1,200. Go ahead, take them. Give it 10 years and you'll have a civil war guaranteed. They'll be overthrowing the king or some other ruler. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There are already 460,000 of us here. Honestly, when I try to imagine that number, and I don't just imagine it the other day as part of my favorite exercise, tedious calculations, I figured out that if all the subscribers lined up shoulder to shoulder, that line would stretch for 230 kilometers. Don't ask me why I calculated that, but better yet, subscribe if you still haven't. Our segment, How to Lift Russia Off Its Knees Without Attracting the Attention of the Orderlies, or The Russian Economy is Growing, but just a little bit negatively. So, Indian refineries are currently boycotting new purchases of Russian oil. Indian oil refining companies are not placing new orders for Russian oil deliveries. They're waiting for clarification. Well, they're thinking about how to get around it. Maybe Russia will offer them a scheme for bypassing the sanctions, but for now it's a stop. Now, if they start replacing it, that's already a process that will be hard to stop. And at the same time, Russia is further increasing discounts for Chinese companies on its oil purchases. Soon, Russia might even have to pay China and India to take its oil.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And the mood is grim. Almost 80% of Russian industry has slipped into recession. 18 out of 24 sectors of Russian manufacturing, which account for nearly 80% of all goods produced in the country, are experiencing a decline in production. These figures are cited in a report by experts from the Institute of National Economic Forecasting of the Russian Academy of Sciences. They themselves are presenting this data in Russia. Well then, everything is going according to plan. The bald Medusa, our helmsman. On the Russian island of Sakhalin, a thermal power plant exploded, causing a blackout. It is reported that there were mass power outages there. Well, and in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, Korsakov, Dolinsk, and other populated areas, local residents report some kind of impact or flash. Well, someone saw a meteorite flying by there the other day. That is, if anything, it wasn't us. At all. It's almost 7,000 kilometers to Sakhalin. They already have their own theory there, saying it was some kind of technical malfunction, but it's 7,000 kilometers away. By the way, my grandfather served there during Soviet times. Sakhalin Island, and then there's a harbor, you know. And across the harbor is the village of Sovkavan, Soviet harbor. So 30 kilometers from that village, there's a closed military town with an airfield. It's called Mangokta. And my grandfather served there ages ago. He used to tell stories about how they lived in wooden barracks without any amenities. With his whole family, with kids. Just imagine that for a second. This isn't the tropics or anything like that, you know. They lived in barracks. He told all sorts of interesting stories, like how a forest fire could just sweep through and suddenly the barracks would be gone. Nothing left, no belongings, nothing at all. Yeah? And they say that's just how those times were. They lived in barracks. I said, Grandpa, well, when I got a bit older, I asked him, I said, why did you live in a barrack out there with no amenities? Well, at least you could have thought of your family. All right, you were a strong man, but you had grandma there and you had my mom when she was little. Well, I was serving my country. I said, okay, you were serving your country, but did your country even care about you, how you were living in a wooden barrack in those terrible freezing temperatures? He said, well, that's just how those times were. That's just how those times were. Who else is out there feeling nostalgic for the Soviet Union? By the way, near Sovetskaya Gavan, there's also a settlement called Zaveti Ilicha, so it's like hitting the jackpot over there. Well, I just watched some footage and there aren't any wooden barracks left. They've already been demolished. Now, there are barracks made out of some kind of blocks, but it's still very, very bleak. That's how it all looks. Russia is ready to provide security guarantees. Do you know to whom? To NATO countries. And do you know what kind of guarantees? That Russia won't attack them. That's what Lavrov said. I mean, what are you guys even on over there? What are you doing over there at the foreign ministry, huh? First it's Lavrov, then Zakharova. They just spout complete nonsense. First of all, it's funny to hear the words Russia and guarantees in the same sentence. I mean, we all know what a guarantee from Russia is worth. Putin himself personally said that he wasn't going to attack Ukraine, that he didn't need Crimea. Well, we all see how that turned out. And secondly, about guarantees. Go ahead, attack NATO countries. You've been claiming on your propaganda shows for 4 years now that you're at war with NATO. So go ahead, attack them. What's stopping you? You know what? How about this? Ukraine can give you guarantees instead. You withdraw from our territory, and Ukraine guarantees that it won't attack Russia. I'm not joking. We could even sign some kind of Zhytomyr memorandum. Russians. They keep insisting that Ukraine wanted to attack them. That's some kind of separate fantasy they have in their heads. So that you don't have to be so afraid, we'll give you a guarantee that the terrible, terrible Ukraine-Saxons, the Satanists, won't come and infect you with non-traditional, some kind of values all of a sudden. Remember how Russia's representative Nebenzia at the UN Security Council was telling stories about how we supposedly invented drones, some kind of mosquitoes were bred, drones deliver mosquitoes to Russia, the mosquitoes bite Russian soldiers and infect them with some terrible diseases. So here's our guarantee, we won't be sending you any mosquitoes, carriers of non-traditional values that we've already bred here in our secret laboratories. Live peacefully in your own swamp, but you'll have to return what doesn't belong to you. The Kremlin failed in its attempt to save relations with Trump. There really was such an attempt. I was just watching it and thinking, you simply couldn't come up with a worse idea. In other words, they did everything possible to make the rift between Putin and Trump even worse than it already was. Kirill Dmitriev, who urgently flew to Washington to try to save relations with the Trump administration, came back not just empty-handed, but he caused all sorts of trouble there. In short, the most important thing is that when Dmitriev flew there, none of the actual decision-makers were present. Trump wasn't there, Rubio wasn't there, Scott Bessent, the finance minister, wasn't there either. They had all gone on a tour of Asian countries. Dmitriev gave a couple of interviews to Fox News and CNN, said something there, talked about some things, and he also reported that he had given American officials information about the Burevestnik missile. Putin had tested it over there. Dmitriev said, it's very important that this information is communicated directly to the leadership and key people in the US presidential administration. So he flew over there, this guy, a bit of a fool, though unfortunately he's not actually a fool, he's quite smart, but his role was a bit foolish. He flew over there and said, make sure you pass this along. To the White House, we tested a missile, a terrifying flying missile. It's called Chernobyl Burevestnik. It flew 500 billion kilometers around the whole universe, came back and landed right in the yard. Just like you have with Elon Musk, well, ours landed the same way with the nuclear engine. So make sure you pass that along. Let them be afraid. You see, he came to tell how they launched it and how they conducted the nuclear tests. And he thought that now Trump, they tested the Burevestnik. God, unpack the suitcases, Melania. Unpack the suitcases. Forget the Asian tour. I'll have to go bow to Putin instead. Is that how you imagined it? Yes, in the end, Finance Minister Scott called Bessent Dmitriev a propagandist as well. Well, and Trump called the statements about the Burevestnik inappropriate. And the story with the chocolates that Dmitriev brought, that's just a classic of Russian diplomacy. Just so you understand, Dmitriev brought a box of chocolates with him. And on each chocolate, Putin's quote. On the cover, there's Putin's face and the inscription, "Great words of a great man." Yeah, and who is that? That's the Botox jellyfish, this 1.5 meter tall great man. Well, Hitler also thought he was great. On those chocolates, the quotes are just a mix of crude humor and threats. Let me read you a couple of quotes now, just so you understand what kind he brought. More threatening chocolates. Russia is the kind of country that fears nothing. If you step out of line, you'll get clubbed over the head. These are Putin's quotes, just to remind you. Russia's borders never end. The fewer teeth you have, the more you love porridge. If necessary, we can teach anyone a lesson ourselves. If a fight is inevitable, you have to strike first. So these are the chocolates he brought. Well, honestly, it's this kind of thug-like, somewhat backward humor. How pathetic they are. They got slapped with sanctions by Trump himself. And they rushed to scare everyone with that flying Chernobyl. And with quotes on chocolates, oh, how scared everyone is. Well, they have a whole team over there. So Orbán and Fico, the Biba and Boba of European politics, decided they need to unite in an alliance against Ukraine. Now they've found a third member for their team. Hungary intends to join forces with Slovakia and the Czech Republic to form an alliance within the European Union that is skeptical toward Ukraine, he stated. The chief political advisor to Prime Minister Orbán, Balázs Orbán, well, he has the same last name too. So according to him, Orbán, the one who is the prime minister, is counting on political cooperation with Andrej Babiš, who recently won the parliamentary elections in the Czech Republic, and of course with Fico. As they say, we'll create our own alliance with Blackjack and Babiš. Well, this is just... When Ukraine is bleeding, losing its best sons and daughters in this insane war that Putin started, what kind of scum do you have to be to, at this moment, create an anti-Ukrainian alliance, sabotage Ukraine, block anti-Russian sanctions, block aid to Ukraine, block Ukraine's path to the European Union? You really have to be a textbook, absolute scumbag, right? The oil leech doesn't understand one thing. The war will end and everyone will have to pay the bill. As the Ukrainian oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky, who is now in prison, says, life is a supermarket. Take whatever you want, but at the exit there will always be a checkout. Well, Ukrainians are peaceful and open people, but they know how to fight for their freedom, and they've shown this to the whole world. And as for cases like these with anti-Ukrainian alliances, we have a little black notebook where we write everything down so that later, after the war, so we don't forget, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and friends, I really ask you, let's support the fundraiser for the 117th Brigade, for our heroes, for our UAV operators. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.